I really appreciate the Houston media that's here. If you report on this, you are going to save lives. So thank you very much for being here. My name is Sam Young. Everybody already knows that. But my daughter, Amy Young, my oldest out of 6 daughters, is going to speak for a few minutes. Then we have Michael Norris, who is with SNAP, the Survivors Network of those abused by priests. They have gotten behind our movement in a big way, and I really, really appreciate that. They were very instrumental in exposing the abuse that was going on in the Catholic Church, and so it's great that they're with us. And then Natasha Helfer Parker, a great friend. She brings the professional expertise, and I think you'll really enjoy what the light she can shed on this. So she's trained as a sex therapist, which I still think sounds weird, but I think the younger generation gets that. Sex therapist, but family and marriage counselor, and has been doing that for a long, long time. Today, we are presenting hundreds of victim impact statements of children whose lives have been damaged, destroyed, or ended by a policy in my Mormon church that must come to a stop. So I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which commonly is referred to as the Mormons. My church is a good church. It does many good things. Actually, Amy, I would like you up here with me, sweetie. I'll give her a little moral support by standing next to me while I talk.
Absolutely.
Here. Okay.
Good to be here.
The Mormon people are good people. Each congregation is led by a bishop who is an unpaid volunteer, and he usually occupies his position for about 5 years. The vast majority of our bishops are among the finest men you'll ever meet. I'm not here to speak against my church or to speak against its leaders. I'm here to speak against one policy and to call for its immediate stop. If you are not Mormon, you will be shocked at what we're doing to our kids. It is an approved practice in my church for bishops and other local leaders to take children behind closed doors all alone and pose questions of a sexual nature to the child. These questions are being asked by older men, often without the knowledge or permission of the parents. Now, I was a bishop for 5 years. I attended Brigham Young University, studied chemical engineering. Mormon bishops are accountants, dentists, and car salesmen that live down the street. No specialized training on how to deal with children and sexual matters. What could possibly go wrong with an adult alone with a child probing with sexual questions? Over 2,000 people have now shared their horrible consequences that have resulted from one-on-one meetings with Mormon leaders. Over 300 people have now come forward with their victim impact statements, sharing their stories in public. Recently, I received this message from a distraught father. He shared this. In 2014, I lost my 14-year-old son to suicide. I have no doubt that these bishops' interviews played a role in my son's end-of-life decision. His tragic story is number 169. Yesterday, I received a similar call. I was informed of another child who recently died by suicide. It resulted directly from the unnecessary shame inflicted on this child behind the bishop's closed door. How about suicide of an adult? At 14 years old, she was raped by her bishop. She managed to survive for another decade, a decade and a half. She established a career in a field of public service protecting others. Ultimately, she succumbed to the shame of her early childhood years, shame that never should have been hers. She took her own life. What can go wrong behind closed doors? A child alone being asked explicit sexual questions? Go read the stories. I don't know how anyone could possibly read 10 of them without feeling an oppressive weight of sadness. In stories 53 and 120, little girls were sexually assaulted behind the closed door of the bishop's office. One was 7 years old. The other was 12. Neither of these bishops were prosecuted. I cannot begin to imagine the trauma that these little innocent girls experienced or the shame that they carried for so many years. Both wish that a mom or a dad had been at their side, rather than having to face an older man in a lonely room all by themselves and then be violated. Most of our bishops are good men, but there are pedophiles among us. I've highlighted 2 stories of bishops who were pedophiles. I know of at least 8 other children who were sexually assaulted by their own bishop. As the word gets out that there is a safe place for victims to share their stories, more survivors are going to come forward. Last year, 5 Mormon bishops were either charged or convicted of child sexual assault. So far this year, 2 more bishops have been arrested. The church is now defending itself against a major lawsuit in West Virginia for covering up child sexual abuse for years. This should be a huge wake-up call. And then the Larry Nassar case, a respected, talented, and trusted doctor. He sexually abused hundreds of Olympic gymnasts over decades. He had access, and he took advantage of it. This should be another gigantic wake-up call. We have turned over unfettered access to our children into the hands of church leaders and given them permission to talk about any sexual matter. This is a recipe for disaster. We are the only church in America that allows children to go behind closed doors one-on-one with an adult. The only one. And then to give full license to ask any of the explicit and gross questions that are now coming out in story after story after story. What we have done to our children is hideous. I have 6 daughters. 3 of them were asked explicit sexual questions. I didn't find out until a decade after the fact. Parents, don't let it happen to your children. Bishops, the time is now. Taking a child behind closed doors and talking sex is dangerous and damaging. I believe most bishops have good intentions. Until now, they may not have been aware of the damage they have caused. We now know. Bishops, starting today, don't take a child into your office all alone. Make sure a parent or another adult of the child's choosing is in the room. Do not ask sexual questions. This will protect the child and it will protect you. Now, there is some really good news. Our grassroots efforts are making a difference. A few bishops are not waiting on headquarters to make changes. 2 of these bishops are right here in Houston. They have chosen to protect our kids instead of following the established protocol. Thank you, you wise and brave bishops. Now, Houston is known as the oil capital of the world. But we have become known for something so much more important. We are known throughout the world for our compassion. for immediately jumping up to help when we see people in trouble. Hurricane Harvey battered our fair city for day after day after day. Our community took swift action. Without prodding or hesitation, as caring human beings, we jumped in our boats, we opened our wallets, we freely gave of our time. Luminaries of our city led the charge: J.J. Watt, Mattress Mac, and many others. My dear, huge-hearted Houston friends, I'm no J.J. Watt. I'm no Mattress Mac. I'm just a little guy. But as a little guy, I've been exposed to the massive damage that we have done to so many Mormon children, and it hurts. I will recover, but many of these children will never recover. Many of these children are gone forever. I'm asking my Houston friends, please jump in your boats and come to the rescue of our children in two ways. First, reach out to your Mormon neighbors and coworkers. Express your support for them in standing up to change this dangerous policy. You see, it's super difficult to speak up against the rules and traditions of my church. I have now been threatened with excommunication if I continue to speak out. Excommunication is a scary thing. But for me and my house, which now includes 13 precious grandchildren, what my church is doing to our own children is scarier than excommunication. Please help give your Mormon friends confidence that they are right to call for the end of behind closed door meetings with our kids about sexual matters. Second, my fellow Houstonians, sign the petition, which calls for the Mormon Church to immediately halt one-on-one meetings with children. Whether you're Mormon or not, please sign the petition. You can find it at protectldschildren.org. Protectldschildren.org. And while you're there, read a story or two, and you'll understand why the children need everyone's help. Why am I calling my fellow Houstonians to help? I've been working for change within the church for well over a year. Nothing is happening. Our kids are in danger. Thank you.
Dad, do you want to stay up here for some moral support for me? To stay up here with me? So thank you, Dad. I'm so proud of you. Okay, so like my father, I love my church. For me, it has always been a safe place. I've been one of the lucky ones. My worthiness interviews made me feel loved, valued, and I was reminded as a child that I was a beloved daughter of God on a regular basis. I was taught that I would find joy and safety in living a pure life. I have dear friends and family who were able to find peace through the repentance process, guided lovingly by a bishop in private worthiness interviews. Based on my personal experience, my initial response was to reject the stories that my father had brought into the light. My first instinct was to push back against his insistent warnings that I never send one of my children alone into a worthiness interview. Everything was fine for me. Why would I expect any different for my children? As someone that has been served well by my church, I've cringed at the thought of the reputation of my church being muddied as these imperfections and atrocities have been brought into the light. When my fellow members bristle at the headlines, I can't help but bristle along with them. But I've been in a very unique position. For thousands of church members, this is the first they are hearing of this problem. I, on the other hand, have been watching for over a year as my father has shed tears over email after email after email after email, as thousands of people who felt alone, rejected, and worthless have shared their stories with him. So grateful to have finally found someone within the church that really cares. someone that gives validation and value to their experience as he seeks to prevent future children from having the same experience. I've seen what it means to truly empathize with another, regardless of disparate circumstances. As my father has felt and reflected the anger, resentment, fear, disappointment, heartbreak, and pain and loneliness of these cast-offs of my beloved church. I've seen his frustration and dismay at the lack of support from local and regional church authorities after a year of seeking to make any kind of improvement on behalf of the safety of the children. I've seen and heard the anger and judgment that has been hurled at him as he's refused to be silenced in his endeavor to bring about a change. I've seen people question his character, his motives, and his methods, and immediately dismiss his mission. What I want for everyone to know is that at heart, my father is a peacemaker. He believes there is a place for everyone at the table. He believes that by listening with true compassion, seeking to understand, to learn, and then to improve, we can find a better way to serve all the children of our church. He is doing the unthinkable. He's trying to bridge the gap between those that have only been served well by the church with those that have been destroyed by it, those who lost in the game of Bishop Roulette. It's both my prayer and my father's that the safety of all children who are brought into our houses of worship can and will be a mutual goal.
Good morning. My name is Michael Norris. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse by the clergy myself. I call myself a survivor because I made it. Most of us don't make it. Typically, we end. This is getting emotional for me. I was not expecting this. I'm sorry, but most of us don't make it because we end up drug abusing, abusing alcohol, and ending our life through suicide. But I made it. I'm here today, and that's why I'm passionate about ending sexual abuse, because I've lived it, and it's not fun. I'm the leader for SNAP here in Houston. SNAP is a group that is about protecting children from being sexually abused, especially by clergy. We got our starts in the Catholic Church, but as you're hearing today, it's across all churches, unfortunately. I'm here today really to support Sam Young and for the efforts that he's doing to end this practice of sexually explicit interviews as part of the LDS Church. I want to commend Sam for what he's doing. It takes a lot of courage to stand up and do the right thing. So it's a great effort that he's trying to take on here. The practice of asking children sexual explicit questions is unacceptable under any circumstance, much less alone between a child and an adult. If the LDS Church wishes to continue this practice, they must require the parents of the child to be present, in my opinion. There's never a valid reason to have this conversation in this forum. The child is put in an extremely vulnerable position through this practice. Talking about sex behind closed doors with a child violates trust, makes it easier for a predator to groom victims for abuse. The practice is very attractive for predators who want to take advantage of getting the opportunity to be alone with a child. Too many Mormon children, as you can see through this collection of stories, have been hurt by this practice, and it needs to end today. What this is all about is protecting the innocence of children. Once you take the innocence away, it's gone forever. I call on all the members of the LDS Church to stand up and demand a change in this practice today. Sam's voice and the voices of all the other victims and survivors out there should be all that is needed to make sure that not another single child is sexually abused in one of these meetings. And that's literally what this is all about. We need to protect our children. Thank you.
Sorry if I'm messing with that. Hello, my name is Natasha Helfer Parker. As a licensed marriage and family therapist and one of the few AASECT certified sex therapists working within the Mormon community, I have been making public statements about my concerns regarding these worthiness interviews taking place between adult men and minor children and adolescents behind closed doors for years. When a religious institution decides that a certain aspect of normal sexual human behavior is a sin, such as masturbation or same-sex sexuality, it creates an artificial problem for its members to grapple with, and in the name of God, no less. Since God, or the interpretation of God in these communities, trumps all else, leaders who represent God's voice play a role in stripping self-autonomy and authority from developing youth raised within that system. This blunts sexual development and interferes with spiritual experiences. The practice of worthiness interviews and having sexual questions asked of minors, often with the result being a form of ecclesiastical discipline, violates 8 of the 16 sexual rights put forth by the World Association of Sexual Health, and has implications for 4 out of the 6 sexual health principles that have been further developed from those rights. This happens at a pivotal time in sexual development. Even in the best of circumstances, where you have a loving bishop concerned with the welfare and spiritual development of a minor, the current structure and power dynamic of a worthiness interview, which is an inquiring or even interrogatory process looking to qualify worthiness, as if that's something that we can measure to begin with, is currently set up in a way where the bishop cannot help but cause emotional, psychological, and spiritual harm. He cannot help it. He cannot help but normalize and participate in grooming behaviors that violate the most basic of personal boundaries and the right to privacy. These interviews often include probing questions about sexuality, anything from masturbation, viewing sexually explicit materials, sexual orientation, gender identity, and premarital sexual exploration are things that teens and preteens can be asked about by men with no formal sexual nor theological training. Imagine an adult man using their ecclesiastical authority to, in essence, direct a minor child on matters such as where their own hand may or may not touch their own body. Where is the respect and honor for sexual autonomy and privacy in that? A minor in our community does not have the skill set, maturity, nor permission to balk at questions asked. And in the rare occasions where they might exert a healthy boundary, like refusing to answer a question or stating their discomfort, that type of behavior would commonly be interpreted as prideful, lacking humility, and reminiscent of a non-repentant attitude, things that I think we're familiar with, furthering the potential for disciplinary action. In other words, those things have been said about me and Sam. As an LDS mental health professional who has been working with thousands of Mormons for over 20 years, believe me when I tell you that I have heard these stories firsthand. Stories like the one Sam has been collecting on his website, the most heinous of which include a clear breach into sexual assault. But even when these criminal acts are not present, many more complications ensue from this practice in the context of sexual shaming. Sexual shaming, whether intentional or not, is a natural consequence of these worthiness interviews. Depression, anxiety, OCD, and scrupulosity, even to the point of self-abuse, which are common practices with many adolescents I see, where they are cutting themselves or causing other types of self-injury. suicidal ideation, and tragically completion due to guilt and shame of being deemed sexually unworthy. Sexual repression that follows into sexual relationships once one is trying to enjoy marital intimacy, leading to or exacerbating clinical issues such as anorgasmia, sexual desire disorders, erectile dysfunction, and premature ejaculation. Unwarranted guilt and shame over sexual fantasy and enjoyment can interfere with sexual desire and the sexual response cycle. Self-identity and esteem issues, where it's difficult to conceptualize yourself as a sexual person at all. Or at the other extreme, you've internalized that somehow you're over-sexualized and therefore feel abnormal or broken or have bought into the false notion that you're an addict. There needs to be a dramatic overhaul in how the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints addresses sexuality so that its members can live safer, healthier, and more satisfying lives within this realm. Worthiness interviews that measure the worth of individuals due to arbitrary understandings by untrained leaders in different geographical locations who conduct these meetings need to stop, and need to stop today. Do not mistake my words to mean that I'm implying that there is no room for youth ministry. Of course, this can be an important and even pivotal part of an adolescent support system, especially for those who maybe come from abusive family systems. As many other church communities have noted and taken precaution, youth ministry does not need to include these types of interviews behind closed doors, where sexual questions that breach basic privacy rights are asked. The changes that we are asking for require no doctrinal shifts. These would be changes of policy and tradition. And we have great precedents in Mormonism to scrutinize, challenge, and abandon what we call traditions of our fathers that are not in our best spiritual interest. I am confident that our newly sustained prophet, President Russell M. Nelson, along with his counselors, President Oaks and President Eyring, can do the right thing by our members and address this issue once and for all. As many of the athletes in the Michigan State case have stated, those of us who enable systems and processes where abuse can happen, we share in the responsibility of the consequences. And I say that directly to my first presidency. In the meantime, I would encourage LDS parents and guardians of minors to assert your authority and request that your children not be put in these types of situations. With about 100,000 members of the LDS Mormon Church here in the Houston area, and about 350,000 members in the state of Texas, which is about an equivalency of about 700 congregations, I would also encourage state licensed mental health professionals and sexual assault support centers to educate yourselves on these matters when working with those within the Mormon faith community. Thank you for your time.
Okay, so that's it. That's our news conference. I want to tell everybody thank you so much for coming. You know, you're honoring the sacred stories that have been shared from our sacred children that have been violated. Thank you for coming here to help further this cause, to make the changes that more stories won't be written by our children. So thanks for coming. And at this point, we'll have, if the media would like to do interviews, we're all available, especially Chris, you want to do an interview? Or Sandra? So we'd be available if you wanted to do an interview. Thank you very much.